doctors said that in another 30 minutes, my sister's heart would have stopped beating. 30 minutes. The time it takes to watch a sitcom on Netflix or scroll through a few rounds on TikTok. A fleeting moment that erases the line between life and death. All of it. Over a glass of champagne. A sparkling glass of champagne, offered with a smile. But it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And that deadly glass of champagne was meant for me. Hello everyone, my name is Avery, and this is the story of the engagement party I had always dreamed of. The party that turned into a crime scene right before the eyes of hundreds of guests. Looking back at these images, even I find it hard to believe. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like diamond dust falling from the vaulted ceilings. Laughter and well wishes echoed through the ballroom, mingling with the sound of string music. I was standing there, in a cream-colored gown, next to Liam, the wonderful man I was about to marry. On the surface, everything was perfect. A fairy tale picture just as my mother, Genevieve, had always demanded. But have you ever gotten that chill down your spine for no reason? That primal, instinctual feeling that tells you a predator is hiding somewhere in the crowd, even when everyone around you is smiling? That's exactly how I felt when I saw my mother approaching us, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She was the queen of this fabricated kingdom, a southern matriarch with a smile sculpted from ice and a grace that concealed an iron will. She handed me a glass of champagne, saying it was a special vintage, just for me, to celebrate. But her eyes weren't smiling. They were watching, assessing, waiting. And my nose caught it. A strange scent, almost undetectable, hidden beneath the notes of grape and yeast. A dry, chemical smell. It wasn't paranoia. It was a survival instinct honed over 28 years of living under her invisible but absolute control. In a moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity, as the world around me blurred, I made a decision. A decision no one, not even my fiancé, noticed. I gently swapped my glass with my sister Brooks, who was standing beside me, laughing happily. And that decision, a decision made in less than 3 seconds, didn't just save my life, it ignited a horrifying truth. Exposing a conspiracy more sinister than my worst nightmares. It exposed dirty financial secrets, unimaginable betrayals, and the true face of the woman I called my mother. In today's video, I won't just tell you what happened on that fateful night. I will take you deep into the eye of the storm, turn every page of a narcissist's diary, confront the painful truth from my closest loved ones, and show you how I had to fight to reclaim not just justice, but my very soul. Stay with me, because this story will make you question the very people you trust the most. To understand why a glance, an unusual scent from a wine glass, could trigger the highest level of alarm bells in me, you need to understand Savannah, or rather, Genevieve's Savannah. My mother didn't just live there. She defined it, at least in our world. It was a world built on the foundations of unshakable traditions, perfect facades, and most importantly, social standing. She was a work of art in control. From the golden blonde curls set every morning to the hydrangeas in the garden that had to be the exact right shade of blue, everything in Genevieve's line of sight had to be perfect, had to project the image of a prestigious, flawless family. I was the crack in that perfect picture. From a young age, I never hid my distaste for the phony tea parties or the unspoken rules of high society. While my sister Brooke easily became the version our mother wanted, beautiful, obedient, and married to a man my mother had approved of beforehand, I craved other things. I dreamed of bold designs, of skyscrapers of glass and steel, things utterly foreign to the moss-draped historic mansions of Savannah. So, I ran away. My escape came in the form of an architectural scholarship in Austin, Texas. In Austin, for the first time in my life, I could breathe. I built a life for myself, a career I was proud of. And there, I met Liam. Liam was everything my mother's world was not. He was genuine, kind, and successful on his own terms in the tech world. Most importantly, he loved me for who I was, not my family tree. He encouraged my independence. He cheered on my ambitions. To me, he was peace. But to my mother, he was a threat. An uncontrollable outsider who was pulling her rebellious daughter even further away. When we got engaged, a foolish part of me hoped that my happiness would finally please my mother. That's why I agreed to have the engagement party in Savannah. It was an olive branch I extended, a concession. But Genevieve didn't take the olive branch. She snatched it and turned it into a rod to control everything. The small and intimate party I requested quickly morphed into the social event of the year. My guest list was replaced with her list of my father's business partners and her garden club friends. Every detail, from the band to the menu, was commandeered by her. Things came to a head the afternoon before the party. I went to my parents' house to get ready, and the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I went looking for my father to ask him something, and as I neared his study, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and cold, though she tried to keep it low. "Walter, don't be a coward," she hissed. "You know our situation. We are on the verge of bankruptcy. Your company is sinking." My father's voice was tired and pleading. "Genevieve, we can't do this to her. There has to be another way." "Another way?" My mother let out a cold laugh. "There is no other way. The Weatherby boy adores her. A union with their family would save us. Tonight, she needs to realize Liam isn't suitable. I just need her to lose face a little, to need to lean on us. I'm going to teach her a lesson." At that moment, standing in the hallway, I did what I had always done. I rationalized it. I told myself it was just more of my mother's drama, an exaggeration in a moment of anger. On the verge of bankruptcy? Ridiculous. Teach her a lesson? That was just my mother's familiar language. I turned and walked away, not wanting to hear more, reassuring myself that tonight would be over soon. Looking back now, I see that my instincts were screaming warnings, but my rational mind, trained for years to doubt itself, ignored them. And so, I walked into that ballroom, wearing a well-practiced fake smile, completely unaware that I was walking into a meticulously set trap, and its weapon was a mother's love. The party was an elaborately staged production, and my mother, Genevieve, was both the director and the leading star. Liam and I moved through the crowd like supporting actors assigned the roles of smiling and nodding. Every congratulation I received from my parents' friends felt like an appraisal. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing a version of my family, an asset, a continuation. Liam, with his sharp intuition, sensed it. He squeezed my hand, a steady anchor in the storm of fake pleasantries. The contrast became painfully clear when Liam's parents, David and Sarah, flew in from California. They found me in the crowd, and Sarah pulled me into a genuinely warm hug, free of any calculation. "You look so happy, Avery," she said, her eyes shining with sincere joy. David patted Liam on the shoulder and said to me, "Thank you for making our son smile so much." They were simple, direct words, and they nearly brought me to tears. Because just minutes later, my mother pulled me away to introduce me to the Weatherby family. "Avery, you remember Michael Weatherby?" she said, her voice as sweet as honey but every word a silken knife. "He's just moved back to Savannah to take over the family business. A very stable young man." Her eyes flickered toward Liam, who was talking a short distance away, a look filled with comparison and disdain. About an hour before the party ended, my mother signaled for the band to stop playing. She stepped onto a small dais, microphone in hand, commanding everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice resonating through the hall. Before we have the official toast, our family would like to have a private moment, a special toast just for the happy couple. A server appeared with a silver tray. On it were 6 glasses, 5 glasses of bubbling golden champagne and 1 glass of dark, almost blood-red wine. My heart began to pound. As many of you know, my mother continued, her smile flawless, our poor Avery is prone to terrible champagne headaches. It was a bald-faced lie. I could drink champagne all night without an issue, and she knew it. So I've had a special vintage red wine brought up from your father's cellar, just for you, my darling. She took the glass of red wine and handed it to me. The other 5 glasses were passed to her, my father, Liam, and my sister Brooke and her husband James. All eyes were on me, some sympathetic, others curious. I stared at the wine in my hand. In the light, the liquid looked thick and heavy. I brought it to my nose, pretending to enjoy the bouquet. And then I smelled it again, clearer than before. That dry chemical scent, hidden behind the aroma of ripe fruit. A scent that didn't belong. My rational mind screamed that I was imagining things, that I was paranoid from the argument I'd overheard. But my instincts, honed by 1,000 sleights and manipulations, were screaming a different message: poison. My mother raised her glass. Now, a toast to new beginnings. To new beginnings, everyone echoed. In that split second, as everyone raised their glasses and turned to each other, as Brooke turned to whisper something to James, I acted. With a movement so smooth and swift I barely registered doing it myself, I switched our glasses. My hand placed the red wine in Brooke's and took her champagne in its place. It happened in the blink of an eye. Cheers, I said brightly, and brought the champagne to my lips. My eyes never left my mother. I saw her watching me, an intense, expectant look. She was waiting for me to drink, and as I took a sip of the clean, crisp champagne, I saw a flicker of confusion cross her face. The trap had been sprung, except I wasn't the prey. After the toast, people began to mingle again. I tried to maintain a calm facade, talking to guests, but all of my focus was on 2 people. My mother, who kept glancing at me every few minutes with a puzzled look, as if wondering why her lesson hadn't taken effect, and my sister Brooke, who was happily sipping the red wine, completely oblivious. And I began to count silently, waiting for something terrible to happen. The next 10 minutes were a century in hell. I tried to act normal, making small talk with distant relatives, nodding and smiling at the right moments, but my every nerve was stretched taut. Liam sensed the shift in me. "Are you okay, Avery?" he whispered, his hand finding the small of my back. "You look pale." I just shook my head, unable to form words. How could I explain that I was waiting for my own sister to collapse from a poison meant for me? My eyes never left Brooke. She looked radiant, laughing with her old high school friends. She raised the red wine to her lips again, and a chill shot down my spine. She was completely unaware, an innocent lamb happily drinking poison from the hand of her own shepherd. Meanwhile, my mother, Genevieve, continued to watch me from a distance. I could see the growing confusion in her eyes. She expected me to be dizzy, to be weak, to be making an excuse to leave the party in shame. But I was still standing, and my resilience seemed to irritate her. And then, it began. It started small. I saw Brooke put a hand to her temple, the smile on her face faltering slightly. James, her husband, asked her something quietly. Brooke just waved it off and smiled, probably saying she was fine, just a little warm. But I knew. It was the first sign. 5 minutes later, the signs were clearer. Brooke was mid-sentence when she suddenly stopped, as if she'd forgotten what she was about to say. She blinked a few times, trying to focus. When she took a step to get a glass of water, she swayed, nearly falling if James hadn't been quick to steady her. "I think I need to sit down," I heard her say, her voice starting to slur slightly. By now, a few people nearby had started to notice, but my mother remained still, her gaze fixed on me, then flicking to Brooke, a complex look of confusion and a flash of annoyance. It was as if she thought Brooke was deliberately causing a scene, ruining her drama. But then, the tragedy hit with unstoppable speed. Brooke suddenly gasped for air, one hand clutching her chest. I can't breathe," she said to James, panic flaring in her dimming eyes. "My chest. It feels so heavy." That was it. The fake heart attack. The trap designed to take me down. Everything shattered. The wine glass fell from Brooke's hand. The sound of breaking glass on the cold marble floor, a sharp crack that cut through the music and chatter. Then her. Brooke didn't faint gracefully. She crumpled, knees buckling first, her body slumping forward. James's scream was raw and desperate. The crowd went silent for a second, then erupted into chaos. People backed away, forming a horrified circle around Brooke's still form on the floor. I rushed forward, Liam at my heels. I knelt beside my sister, her skin pale and clammy with a cold sweat. Her lips had a bluish tint. "Brooke! Brooke, can you hear me?" James cried, shaking her. Genevieve finally scrambled over, her mask of composure finally cracking, but her panic was of a different color. "Brooke? It can't be. What is this?" She stammered, staring at her fallen daughter, then looking up at me, her eyes filled with a dawning, horrified accusation as she realized an unbelievable truth. She knew. In that moment, she understood. But I had no time for her. I turned to Liam. "Call 911, now!" I commanded, my voice so cold and decisive it surprised even me. As Liam pulled out his phone, I yelled to him, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Tell them possible drug poisoning, a cardiac medication. Hurry!" Every eye in the room swiveled to me, then back to the shattered wine glass on the floor. And in that suffocating silence, as the wail of sirens began to echo in the distance, I lifted my head and looked directly into my mother's eyes. Her game was over, and a new nightmare had just begun. Time seemed to warp in the ambulance. The wailing siren tore through the quiet Savannah night, red and blue lights flashing obsessively over the tense faces inside. I sat on a small seat, gripping the side of the vehicle, my eyes glued to the team of paramedics working furiously on Brooke. They attached electrodes, took her blood pressure, started an IV line. Every action was swift, professional, but I could see the urgency in their eyes. James was huddled in a corner, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. My father, Walter, sat motionless as a statue, his empty gaze fixed on nothing, seemingly dissociated from reality. And my mother, Genevieve, she was trying to regain control. She peppered the paramedics with questions they had no time to answer. What's wrong with her? Is she allergic to something? Was it the wine? Her voice was sharp, but there was an unmistakable tremor beneath it. She was playing the part of a concerned mother, but in reality, she was frantically searching for another plausible explanation, an escape route for herself. I watched it all in silence, my mind a machine running at full capacity, putting the pieces together. The financial argument, the threats, the special glass of wine, and now the wrong daughter was fighting for her life. The hospital waiting room was a cold, sterile space, a brutal contrast to the fake luxury of the party. The sharp smell of antiseptic hung in the air. We sat there, a broken family under the harsh fluorescent lights. Liam's parents had arrived, their calm presence a grounding force for me. Sarah brought me a cup of water, saying nothing, just placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. The touch meant more than 1,000 words. An hour later, a doctor with a grave expression emerged. We all shot to our feet. "Family of Ms. Allison Brooks?" he asked. James stepped forward. "I'm her husband." "Your wife's condition is stable," the doctor began, and a collective sigh of relief passed through the group. "We got to her in time. Blood tests show a dangerous combination of a high-dose sedative and a beta blocker, typically used to treat heart conditions. This combination induced an acute cardiac arrhythmia. Another half hour, and the outcome could have been catastrophic." My mother put a hand to her mouth, a choked sob escaping. But the doctor wasn't finished. He looked directly at us, his voice clinical. "The concentration of these substances indicates this could not have been an accident or a personal dosage error. This was a deliberate act. We have notified the police, as is our protocol." Those last 4 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Notified the police. Genevieve's world had just imploded. For the first time in her life, I saw my mother look small and terrified. Her armor had been stripped away, leaving only the naked truth. 2 police officers arrived shortly after. They separated us to take initial statements. As they were speaking with James, another officer, a woman, approached my mother, who was sitting next to her expensive leather handbag. "Ma'am, in cases of suspected poisoning, we need to check the personal effects of the victim and those present at the scene. Would you mind if we looked through your purse?" My mother stiffened. "There's nothing in there," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But it was too late. The officer, with professional detachment, gently took the purse. She opened it, checking the contents: wallet, phone, keys, a tube of lipstick. And then, she pulled out something that didn't belong with the usual items: a small, dark blue leather-bound book tied with a silk ribbon. A diary. I held my breath. I never knew my mother kept a diary. It seemed too private, too vulnerable an act for someone so obsessed with controlling her image. The officer put on gloves, carefully placed the diary into a clear evidence bag, and sealed it. "We'll be taking this for further investigation," she said firmly. As they took the diary away, a wave of dizziness washed over me. It wasn't just a book. It was a Pandora's box, containing my mother's darkest thoughts and most sinister plots. And it was about to be opened for the world to see. The hospital waiting room became an unofficial courtroom. The air grew thick with unspoken things. Every footstep in the hall, every announcement over the intercom made us jump. I sat in silence, Liam gripping my hand, his presence the only thing keeping me from shattering. My mother, Genevieve, had been invited into a private room to assist with the investigation. My father, Walter, sat across from me, but his gaze was evasive, fixed on an invisible crack in the floor. He seemed to have aged a decade in just a few hours. About an hour later, one of the 2 detectives approached us. "Ms. Avery, could we have a private word with you for a moment?" Liam stood up with me. "I'm going with her." The detective nodded and led us into a small counseling room where his partner was waiting. On the table between us lay a few sheets of paper. I recognized them immediately as photocopies. "We've been through your mother's diary," the detective began, without preamble. "And what we've found confirms your suspicions. And then some." He pushed a sheet of paper toward me. It was an entry from just a few days before the party. Her handwriting, usually so elegant and graceful, now looked like venomous scratches. I read it, and my chest constricted. "Liam is an obstacle. He encourages her rebellion, must be removed. A small health incident will force her to come home, back under my control. She will realize how much she needs her mother. Walter is too weak to understand that this family's honor is worth more than a daughter's fleeting happiness. She didn't even use my name. I was just her, an object, a pawn in her game." The detective pushed another sheet forward. This one was older, detailing in cold script their financial situation, the debts, and the Weatherby solution. The plan to force me into a marriage with a man I didn't love to save their collapsing fortune. Every word was a knife, not to my skin, but to my very perception of my own family. It wasn't just about control. It was a conspiracy calculated with desperation and cruelty. "We believe your mother acted alone," the detective said, "but there are details in here that suggest your father may have known about parts of the plan. We need to speak with him again." I nodded mechanically, my throat dry. We returned to the waiting room. My father looked up as we approached with the two detectives. His eyes met the photocopies in my hand, and in that instant, his entire defense crumbled. He didn't need to hear a single question. He knew. "Walter Sullivan," the lead detective said, his voice even. "In her diary, your wife mentions that you knew about the plan to teach your daughter a lesson. Can you tell us what you knew?" My father broke down, not in silent tears, but in the racking sobs of a completely broken man. I didn't know," he stammered, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I didn't know she would use that drug, I swear. I just thought she'd put something mild in her drink, to make her a little tired, to make her go home early. Just to scare her, to make her realize that Liam Kid couldn't protect her, to make her come back to the family." He looked up at me, his red-rimmed eyes pleading. "I'm so sorry, Avery. I swear I didn't know it was that dangerous. She said it was just a lesson." Hearing those words, an emptiness washed over me. This pain was different. It wasn't the sharp rage I felt for my mother. It was a dull ache, a collapse from within, the feeling of realizing the very last foundation under my feet was also rotten. My mother was the villain, but my father, the man I had always believed at least loved me in his own way, was the one who held the door open for the wolf. He knew there was a trap, and he stood by and watched me walk into it. "You knew," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You knew, and you did nothing." In that moment, I felt like an orphan, even with both my parents still alive and breathing right in front of me. The hospital waiting room became an unofficial courtroom. The air grew thick with unspoken things. Every footstep in the hall, every announcement over the intercom made us jump. I sat in silence, Liam gripping my hand, his presence the only thing keeping me from shattering. My mother, Genevieve, had been invited into a private room to assist with the investigation. My father, Walter, sat across from me, but his gaze was evasive, fixed on an invisible crack in the floor. He seemed to have aged a decade in just a few hours. About an hour later, one of the two detectives approached us. "Ms. Avery, could we have a private word with you for a moment?" Liam stood up with me. "I'm going with her." The detective nodded and led us into a small counseling room where his partner was waiting. On the table between us lay a few sheets of paper. I recognized them immediately as photocopies. "We've been through your mother's diary," the detective began without preamble. "And what we've found confirms your suspicions. And then some." He pushed a sheet of paper toward me. It was an entry from just a few days before the party. Her handwriting, usually so elegant and graceful, now looked like venomous scratches. I read it, and my chest constricted. "Liam is an obstacle. He encourages her rebellion, must be removed. A small health incident will force her to come home, back under my control. She will realize how much she needs her mother. Walter is too weak to understand that this family's honor is worth more than a daughter's fleeting happiness." She didn't even use my name. I was just her, an object, a pawn in her game. The detective pushed another sheet forward. This one was older, detailing in cold script their financial situation, the debts, and the Weatherby solution. The plan to force me into a marriage with a man I didn't love to save their collapsing fortune. Every word was a knife, not to my skin, but to my very perception of my own family. It wasn't just about control. It was a conspiracy calculated with desperation and cruelty. "We believe your mother acted alone," the detective said, "but there are details in here that suggest your father may have known about parts of the plan. We need to speak with him again." I nodded mechanically, my throat dry. We returned to the waiting room. My father looked up as we approached with the two detectives. His eyes met the photocopies in my hand, and in that instant, his entire defense crumbled. He didn't need to hear a single question. He knew. "Walter Sullivan," the lead detective said, his voice even. "In her diary, your wife mentions that you knew about the plan to teach your daughter a lesson. Can you tell us what you knew?" My father broke down, not in silent tears, but in the racking sobs of a completely broken man. I didn't know," he stammered, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I didn't know she would use that drug, I swear. I just thought she'd put something mild in her drink, to make her a little tired, to make her go home early. Just to scare her, to make her realize that Liam Kidd couldn't protect her, to make her come back to the family." He looked up at me, his red-rimmed eyes pleading. "I'm so sorry, Avery. I swear I didn't know it was that dangerous. She said it was just a lesson." Hearing those words, an emptiness washed over me. This pain was different. It wasn't the sharp rage I felt for my mother. It was a dull ache, a collapse from within, the feeling of realizing the very last foundation under my feet was also rotten. My mother was the villain, but my father, the man I had always believed at least loved me in his own way, was the one who held the door open for the wolf. He knew there was a trap, and he stood by and watched me walk into it. "You knew," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You knew, and you did nothing." In that moment, I felt like an orphan, even with both my parents still alive and breathing right in front of me. The silence after my father's confession was heavier than a scream. It was a silence filled with the shattering, the end of a family as I had known it. A few hours later, Brooke was more alert. She was still very weak, but her eyes were clear again, and in them, I saw a painful understanding. James sat by her bed, not leaving her side for a moment. My father had been taken by the police for a formal statement. That left just Liam and me, sitting in a suffocating silence, waiting. And then, the hospital room door opened. 2 police officers walked in, and between them was my mother, Genevieve. She wasn't in handcuffs, but the police escort said everything. She had demanded to see her daughters. Perhaps she thought she could still spin the situation, could still use her manipulative words to patch up a shredded reality. She walked straight to Brooke's bed, her face perfectly composed, her expression of grief like an actress on a stage. "Brooke, my darling," she began, her voice trembling with drama. "I am so sorry you had to go through this. It was a terrible mistake." Brooke flinched as my mother reached for her hand. It was a small gesture, but it was more powerful than a shout. It was a rejection. For the first time in her life, Brooke had rejected our mother. "Stop pretending, Mother." My voice rang out, cold and unwavering. I stood up, stepping between my mother and my sister's bed, forming a shield. "It's over." Genevieve turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Avery, you don't understand. This is a complicated family matter." "Complicated?" I let out a dry laugh, devoid of any humor. "No, it's very simple. We've read your diary. We heard Dad's confession. You planned to poison your own daughter at her engagement party. You failed and nearly killed your other daughter instead. What's so complicated about that?" Genevieve's expression shifted from feigned grief to suppressed fury. "Those were private thoughts. You had no right. And your father, he's a weakling. He'll say anything to save himself." "He was trying to save you," I countered. He took partial responsibility for his complicity. And you? You're still standing here blaming everyone but yourself. I did it for you, she suddenly screamed, a sound that made us all jump. I did it because you were about to ruin your life with someone unworthy. I did it to save this family's honor, something you've never cared about. You didn't do it for me, I said, my voice maintaining its deadly calm. You did it for yourself, for the debts, for the bankruptcy you were hiding, because you couldn't stand the fact that I had a life you couldn't control. Just then, a weak but clear voice came from the bed. It was Brooke. I was always the good daughter, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I went to the school you chose, married the man you wanted, lived the life you designed. I did everything you asked, and what was my reward? A dose of poison because you were too careless in your attempt to harm my sister. Brooke's words were the final hammer blow that shattered Genevieve's self-control. Both of you, she shrieked, her beautiful face now distorted with rage. You ungrateful little things, after everything I've sacrificed. Sacrificed? I cut in. You call tyrannical control a sacrifice? She didn't answer. Instead, she lunged at me, her hands out like claws. You ruined everything. But she never reached me. Liam was in front of me in an instant, and James shot up from his chair. The two police officers acted immediately, seizing my mother's arms. The scene that followed was pure pandemonium. Genevieve screamed, struggling in the officer's grip. Her shrieks were piercing, no longer those of a matriarch, but of a cornered animal. She cursed me. She cursed Liam. She cursed my father. The perfect facade was ripped away, exposing the true person within, a desperate, narcissistic, and dangerous woman. As they dragged her from the room, she craned her neck back, her bloodshot eyes locked on mine. You'll regret this, Avery. You will never be happy without me. The door slammed shut, cutting off her screams. Silence descended on the room. It was heavy, but it was also a relief. I looked at Brooke, and she looked back at me. For the first time in years, there was no jealousy or distance between us, only a shared understanding born of pain. The storm had passed, and in the shattered quiet it left behind, we knew that finally we were free. The weeks and months that followed were a strange dream, a haze of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and difficult conversations. The case never went to a public trial. Faced with the irrefutable evidence from the diary, my father's confession, and the testimony of the medical staff, my mother's lawyers quickly negotiated a plea deal. Instead of prison, Genevieve was found not criminally responsible due to severe narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid elements. She was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. Sometimes I wonder if that's a worse prison, a place where she's forced to face herself, with no stage to perform on, no audience to manipulate. My father, Walter, also faced consequences. He received a suspended sentence for complicity and obstruction of justice. His probation required him to attend mandatory counseling sessions. He and my mother divorced. For the first time in nearly 40 years, my father had to make his own decisions, from renting a small apartment downtown to choosing what kind of coffee to buy. At first, he was clumsy and lost, but slowly I saw a new person forming within him, a quieter, humbler, and more sincere man. He never asked for our forgiveness, for which I am grateful. Instead, he tried to show his remorse through his actions, by listening, by respecting our boundaries, and by learning how to be a real father, however late. But the real healing happened between Brooke and me. We went to therapy together. In that safe room, we revisited our entire family history, but this time from a shared perspective. We cried for the years we were divided by our mother's toxic comparisons, for a sisterhood that had been stolen. And then, we began to rebuild it, brick by brick, on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. Brooke found her own strength, started setting boundaries with everyone, and began pursuing passions she had once given up to please our mother. 6 months after that fateful night, Liam and I got married. Not in a lavish ballroom in Savannah, but in a small, intimate ceremony by a lake in Austin, Texas. There were only about 30 of our closest friends and family. Brooke was my maid of honor, looking beautiful and serene. My father was there. He walked me down the aisle, and as he gave my hand to Liam, he said just one thing, his voice trembling: "Take care of her." In that moment, I knew he meant it. Many people ask me if I've forgiven my mother. My answer is always that it's more complicated than that. My healing didn't come from forgiveness. It came from a concept my therapist calls radical acceptance. It's not about condoning her actions, not at all. It's about accepting the unchangeable reality. My mother is a severely mentally ill person. She lives in a reality distorted by her own insecurities and fears. My father was a weak man who chose silence over protecting his children. I accept those truths, without judgment, without hate, and without hope that they will ever be different. I accept that my childhood happened the way it did, that the pain was real, and most importantly, I accept that my peace is my own responsibility. It doesn't depend on an apology that will never come, or on a repentance that may never be sincere. My peace comes from setting firm boundaries, from building a life based on genuine love and respect. It comes from trusting my own intuition, that quiet voice that saved my life that night. My story is not about revenge, but about rebirth. It is not a story of a broken family, but of building a new one from chosen friends, and from relationships reforged in truth. I want to ask you, who are listening, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from the hardest chapters of your life? How did you find your peace? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes knowing you're not alone is the very first step on the path to healing. Thanks for listening, and remember, you deserve to be at peace.